Reporters stationed along the gravel lane that leads from the Sandringham Gates to Wood Farm used to joke that the best way to track the Duke of Edinburgh's mood was by the speed of his Land Rover. When the tyres spat stones, they whispered, some directive from Buckingham Palace had annoyed him again. When the vehicle ambled, the Duke had spent the morning happily sketching wildlife or checking the fit of a new beehive. And although those brief sightings seldom made the national wires, they contained the germ of a far bigger story, one that for years remained largely sealed behind palace walls. Only after Princess Anne's candid reminiscence following her father's death did the public learn how deeply that deliberate retreat to Wood Farm had reshaped the final act of Queen Elizabeth II's marriage, and how the arrangement grew out of pressures few fairy tale biographies ever acknowledge. The princess's disclosure, delivered in a clipped but unmistakably emotional BBC interview, has forced the House of Windsor to confront truths it long preferred to archive away with out-of-date court circulars. To understand why a consort who had spent half a century 2 steps behind the sovereign ultimately chose a life of semi-solitude, one must rewind to the early swirl of Prince Philip's existence, a life begun in exile, threaded through 4 monarchies, and tempered by boarding school austerity. Born on 10th of June 1921 on a kitchen table in Corfu, Philip was whisked out of Greece in a fruit crate when his uncle King Constantine was overthrown. The family's Parisian refuge, a borrowed villa at Saint-Cloud, offered little security. By 9, the boy was shipped to Britain, mother institutionalized, sisters married into German nobility, father adrift in Monte Carlo's casinos. Cousinage to Europe's royal houses supplied pedigree, but no foundation. What Philip retained was independence, a knack for making do, and a deep-seated resistance to any rulebook he hadn't tested himself. Those traits caught the eye of 13-year-old Princess Elizabeth on a damp July afternoon in 1939, when the flaxen-haired naval cadet bounded across Dartmouth College's tennis courts to entertain the King's daughters during a tour. Over the war years, their correspondence ripened from friendly teasing into coded devotion. By the time Philip proposed in the summer of 1946, he had survived Mediterranean convoy duty, shelled Axis positions off Sicily, and traded his dynastic titles for a freshly anglicized surname, Mountbatten. Yet the wedding that followed on 20th November 1947 did not so much erase his foreignness as underline it. Behind the Abbey's fanfare lurked palace caution, a penniless prince with German brothers-in-law married to the future queen of a nation still rationing bread. Courtiers recommended grace periods. Newspapers mined family trees for any unacceptable branch, and Prime Minister Attlee muttered about optics. When King George VI died suddenly in February 1952, Philip lost not only a beloved father-in-law, but the relative anonymity that had enabled his brisk naval ascent. His young wife became Elizabeth II. He became an adult whose career dissolved overnight into the role of consort, an undefined position that offered ceremony, not command. The blow landed hardest in 2 places: his service record, which the Yai and Admiralty filed away unfinished, and his surname, which palace advisers refused to lend the royal house. "I am nothing but a bloody amoeba," he fumed to friends, after Winston Churchill's cabinet decreed the dynasty would remain Windsor. Even the promise that untitled male descendants might eventually carry Mountbatten had to wait 8 more years, until the 1960 Order in Council quietly added the hyphenated fallback, Mountbatten Windsor. Philip poured unreleased energy into reform, modernizing palace telephones, revamping the estate workshops, coaxing the Queen toward her first televised walkabout. He chaired her 1953 Coronation Commission, logged 45,000 miles on a globe-circling Commonwealth tour, and accepted a grueling diary that sometimes exceeded hers. Yet the same restlessness drew him toward rough sports, brusque jokes, and social circles that set Fleet Street antennas twitching. In the mid-1950s, rumors surfaced: late-night suppers at Soho clubs, friendships with theater actresses, and most enduringly, whispers of a liaison with Soviet ballet legend Galina Ulanova after a Bolshoi season in London. No photograph ever confirmed the tale, MI5 files remain sealed, but the idea of a consort tempted by exotic company fed both Cold War anxiety and society column titillation. Palace press secretaries issued crisp denials. The Queen issued none, remaining inscrutably calm while insiders noted frostier breakfast conversations. Still, the marriage endured, less by codependency than by negotiated space. The Queen mastered her red boxes and audiences. The Duke championed global youth awards, environmental causes, and what he called bloody good engineering. They shared ponies, black Labrador litters, and an old-fashioned taste for practical jokes. But by the 1990s, after 4 children, innumerable state banquets, and surgery on both wrists and a hip, Philip's patience for regimented palace life frayed. Guardsmen outside bedroom windows, footmen hovering to adjust fireplace trimmings, inevitabilities of Buckingham routine, began to feel oppressive to a man whose formative freedom had been commandeering a rowing boat across Gordonstown's icy Moray Firth. Thus, when renovation plans at Sandringham suggested converting the modest wood farm cottage into a retirement bolt hole, Philip pushed the idea with characteristic bluntness. Queen Elizabeth, ever pragmatic, conceded that her husband's quality of life mattered more than outward symbolism. Courtiers drafted discreet protocols. Philip would step back from public duties after his 96th birthday in 2017, shift his household to Wood Farm, and continue to see the Queen during Norfolk weekends and Windsor interludes. Publicly, the arrangement was presented as a deserved rest. Privately, according to Princess Anne, it was a health and sanity choice. He'd always said, "Just give me air and a workbench." And Wood Farm gave him both, Anne confessed. In that BBC segment, adding that palace rigidity would have killed him faster than any illness. Critics detected undertones of exile. Supporters hailed a refreshing acknowledgement that octogenarian schedules should be self-written. In truth, the separation was geographical, not emotional. The couple spoke by phone daily, shared summer, cruises on the Scottish lochs, and reunited for weddings, jubilees, remembrance ceremonies. Yet the optics of divergence seeded further gossip. Tabloids resurrected the Ulanova myth, appended new names, an Anglo-Irish aristocrat, a Caribbean peeress, a countess who hosted a shooting weekend in the 1970s, and implied the Queen tacitly allowed her husband gentlemanly discretions as long as duty remained unbroken. Then came COVID-19. In March 2020, as Britain locked down, the Queen left London for Windsor. Aides suggested Philip transfer from Norfolk to join the so-called HMS Bubble, a quarantined circle of 24 staff. For the first time in years, monarch and consort lived side by side for months. Observers who glimpsed their evening walks across the East Terrace reported simple domesticity. Her Majesty at a contented stroll, Philip tapping a stick at rabbits. Household officials were struck by how easily they slipped back into shared routine. It was, Anne later said, time we hadn't expected to get, a curtain call that soothed earlier distances. Even as the pandemic raged, Philip's health wobbled. In February 2021, he was admitted to King Edward VII Hospital for an infection, transferred to St Bartholomew's for cardiac treatment, and returned to Windsor to recuperate. On 9th April, he died quietly, 2 months shy of his 100th birthday. The announcement plunged Britain into masked mourning. It also reopened the question of how to characterize a union that had weathered so many private squalls. Enter Princess Anne's televised reflection, filmed ahead of what would have been her father's 102nd birthday. Sitting in her Gatcombe library, she described the decision that led Philip to Wood Farm not as a marital rift, but as self-preservation. The palace was never designed for a non-executive consort, she said. My father didn't leave my mother. He left the circus of people that come attached. She admitted, too, that the Queen struggled with the optics, fearing headlines of estrangement, but ultimately prioritized Philip's mental comfort. He was desperate to hear birdsong, not courtyard echoes. Anne's candor stripped decades of euphemism and, ironically, brought relief to palace aides long forced to stonewall. Yet her interview also confirmed the emotional price. Anne recalled evenings when the Queen, newly returned from an investiture, would sit at Windsor's desk and write long notes to Philip describing her day. A habit from wartime separation that never quite left them. She remembered too the toll on Charles, whose visits to Wood Farm were complicated by duty rosters, and whose relationship with his father was always improved by proximity. He lost conversations, Anne said, referencing the years of separate addresses, and conversations are what my father valued most. The revelation has recalibrated public memory. No longer is the late Duke merely the sometimes gruff, gaffe-prone partner. He becomes a portrait of aging autonomy, a man who bargained personal space within monarchical confines. Royal biographers now cite Wood Farm as an instructive footnote in succession planning. What accommodations might future consorts require to remain effective without feeling caged? For Queen Elizabeth, who died 16 months after Philip, the Wood Farm chapter underscored her adaptability. She accepted that modern marriage, royal or not, could absorb physical distance while retaining emotional fidelity. Her funeral, like Philip's, fused military precision with intimate symbolism, their coffins reunited in St. George's Chapel beside the letter she wrote, simply addressed, Lilibet. In the end, Princess Anne's decision to disclose the behind-the-scenes reasoning has not diminished the monarchy, but humanized it. It reminds the realm that duty, however gilded, does not nullify personal temperament, and that even sovereign partnerships must evolve with age. Philip's retreat to Wood Farm was neither abdication nor silent protest. It was a pragmatic pact between two individuals who had already sacrificed more privacy than most can fathom. That recognition, wrapped in Anne's plain-spoken tribute, may stand as the final lesson of the longest-serving consort in British history. Sometimes the most loyal act is to step out of the limelight, so the bond, not the spectacle, survives.